Centre of the world's attention once again, Mark Cavendish, and justifiably so. 138 professional wins, 3 on the Vuelta, 15 on the Giro d'Italia, 28 on the Tour de France.
And the previous 27 have all looked generally similar, give or take a change of sponsor's logo, an instantaneous display of delight and dental excellence. Yesterday's, though, featured the longest delay between victory and victory celebration of Mark Cavendish's career. That's how long it took to confirm what's probably the smallest winning margin of his career, 0.06 of a second. And he earned it by pedalling all the way to the line, which sounds ludicrously simplistic. But watch how Andre Greipel throws his bike for the line from about 5 metres, at which point he stops pedalling. Cavendish, slightly behind at this point, makes his lunge marginally later, but keeps pedalling. And for all the talk of his Olympic preparation hampering his road performance, it was track training that will have conditioned Mark Cavendish to do that, because on a fixed-wheel track bike, you have to keep pedalling, otherwise you're likely to come to an abrupt halt and launch yourself over the handlebars. Now, it's an uphill finish here on stage 4 in Limoges today, as you can see. Probably more Sagan than Cavendish territory, so it might be Slovakia 2, the Isle of Man 2 in stages by the end of the day, which doesn't mean to say that Cav is dismissing his chances of taking a 3rd stage win and 29th of his Tour career. Daniel checked in with him down at the start in Saumur.
Did you enjoy your celebrations last night at the hotel?
I went to sleep, man. I was tired. It was a long day. Like, okay, we didn't go hard yesterday, but a long day always takes it out here, you know, and we've still got a long Tour de France yet, so.
And it looks like a twisty, hilly finale today. How do you see it panning out? What should we expect?
I don't know. We'll see what kind of break goes. Maybe no one's going to break again. It's an easiest day, then it goes full gas at the end. The thing is, when it is easy like that, it goes hard at the end. Like yesterday was super hard in the final, you know. But I don't know. We'll see. We've got a great team here that's looking for another win. Hopefully we can get it.
You know the experience of having started the Tour de France and not won the first couple of sprints. You've put a bit of pressure on Marcel Kittel and Andre Greipel, haven't you?
Yeah, but I'm not going to worry about what they think, you know. We've got a job in hand, which is to try and win bike races here, so we'll just focus on that and do our best there.
Cheers, Mark.
Mark,
Yeah, interesting. He's obviously not dismissing the idea of going for the stage win today, but it's a tricky finish for him, and you reckon something perhaps a little bit before the finish.
Yeah, there's a couple of bits really. 11 k's to go. There's something that nobody's seen. It's unclassified, little climb, only 1.5 k's long, but it's 8 to 9% within the last 15 minutes of racing. So you can be sure somebody's going to try something there. Still think it's one for the sprinters, even though it ramps up at over 4% for the last 600 meters. But they're going to have to fight all the way for that opportunity if they want it. Their teams are going to have to regroup, probably claw something back after that little climb. So it's going to be interesting for us.
OK, I mean, assume that all the sprinters do make it over that climb with 11k to go. How tough is the finish for the sprinters? Is it more Sagan or is Cavendish going to be up there contesting it?
Well, there's several parts to it. It's not too technical, but there's enough twists and turns that it'll stretch it out. There's a descent before they get to the Flamme Rouge, which again is going to make sure that everybody has fresh legs. They'll arrive in a line, and then they'll hit that ramp and start to concertina as they get to the top of it. So it's another one for patience, wait, hang back a bit, and be coming at it. There's plenty of space. So it's a real technical sprint. Good for Sagan, I think, but Mark Cavendish can't be ruled out of this one for sure.
Probably too tough for the likes of Marcel Kittel. He likes a flat one where he can get some momentum going.
Yeah, and so I think that extra gradient is another mark against him for this one. So I think it's the same players. Possibly Matthews or Alaphilippe could also come in here as well if they're given the space to do so.
Yeah, Alexander Kristoff's birthday too, for all the difference that makes. Now then, there is racing on, so let's get to it via a look at the route map. There it is, 237.5 kilometres from Saumur to Limoges, the longest stage of the race after yesterday's second longest. So after starting up in Normandy, this tour is heading towards the mountains at high speed. One classified climb on today's route, the 4th category at Côte de la Maisonneuve, but as Chris says, it's the unclassified Bosses du Palais sur Vienne, 11 kilometres out, that could make the preliminary section which decide who contests the stage win today. Talking of high speed, there actually seems to be a race today, which there wasn't yesterday. Good news for Ned Boulting and David Miller in the commentary box. Although, Ned, a touching tweet from Geraint Thomas last night. Today was a bad day for commentators that showed at least he was thinking about you even as he was rolling along in that slow-moving pack.
Yeah, Yeah, it's very nice of him to think of us. It was a bit of a grueler at times yesterday, wasn't it, David?
Yeah.
I really haven't seen a race as absent as that for the early stages for as long as I can remember. It was extraordinary.
I think it's the definition of a blessing in disguise. An easy day, but it was actually pretty hard for all of us.
Well, we sent David out, actually, to go and do a bit of shopping in Limoges, and you've come back with a Guide Secret du Tour, a book all about the Tour de France, so hopefully we might have occasion to delve into that little book if the occasion arises. However, as Gary just intimated, there is a decent race on. There are four men up the road, as opposed to just the one that became two yesterday. Those men are Oliver Nason, just caught a glimpse of him there for I Am Cycling, young Belgian rider. Alexis Goujard, the French rider from AG2R La Mondiale, who is a familiar face if you've been watching stage racing over the last few years. Very, very talented man. Saw him in action on the Dauphiné and the Vuelta last year. Markel Irizar from Trek Segafredo, 36 years old and a real veteran domestique campaigner. And Andreas Schillinger, also veteran status, 32-year-old German rider, and he represents Bora Argon, 18. And once again, they've got a rider in a breakaway, so well done to them. They did have an advantage of 5 minutes and 15 seconds, but bit by bit, that has come down, and it's come down pretty fast, actually. Just a few kilometres ago, it was up to about 3 minutes, then 2:30, and now it's under 2 minutes for the first time. There are the four in the breakaway, and that man is Alexis Goujard, a stage winner on the Vuelta last year when he held off Nelson Oliveira from a breakaway. Very, very strong on that day, a French track rider, really. Most of his best results have come up until last year on the track, but he's really making a name for himself on the road. And last time we saw him in action was on the Dauphiné, actually, where he came to grief. Big crash. Bozic crashed in front of him. I don't know if you remember that stage, David. His wheel just locked up as he came off the road, and his front wheel went down into a little irrigation ditch on the side, and Goujard had nowhere to go and just ploughed straight into him, and he had to abandon. He ended up with 10 stitches to his leg, but he's obviously back in form and back in the race.
Yeah, and I mean, I think thankfully for everybody today, this race is a bit more, a little bit more animated than yesterday, which is quite surprising, actually. I thought it would follow very much the same pattern as yesterday. We drove the route last night, almost identical the whole way down from the start to finish. It's quite rare for the Tour de France to do. Like in the old days, the original Tour de France is where it was actually point to point. Nowadays, there are transfers between the start and finish towns, etc. But this, the last couple of days have been very much in the old pattern, where the finish town ends up, the start town is very near, and to the degree actually today, the finish town will be the start town tomorrow. So it's it means that us ahead of the race at the finish line where we are, we get to see the course exactly. And it is it's essentially a straight line for nearly 240 kilometres, and on roads exactly like this the whole time. Now that actually opens up a little bit for the last couple of k's onto very big city boulevards, and so this is in the perfect bunch sprint day. It's almost flat. There's a couple of little bumps towards the end, but nothing that I think will affect the race. But the sprint itself is going to be textbook drag race. It's got this last 500 meters which do go up, as we saw from Chris Boardman, at 4%, which we'll see is I don't think it's going to affect the sprint so much, because they're going to come into it at such high speed. So we're going to get a great sprint, and they'll last for a few days for the pure sprinters.
That's certainly the case. Tomorrow is a medium mountain stage into the Massif Central with a good few climbs, and the first testing terrain for the GC riders. Probably not a big GC shake-up tomorrow, but definitely a day to defend, if not go on the attack for some of the bigger names in the mountains. So it's flattish today, as David's intimated. That climb that Chris Boardman was talking about, with something like 10 kilometres to go, we're slightly kicking ourselves for not doing our reconnaissance and getting out there and having a look at it, because there's a little bit of uncertainty of just how testing that might be. And it might be the launch pad for an opportunist to have a go and get himself off the front. I'm thinking of a rider like, I don't know, let's pick a name at random, Jan Bakelants, that kind of a rider. Might just see an opportunity there.
It would have been if Philippe Gilbert was here, it's sort of perfect launch pad for him. But to be fair, it's the Tour de France, the sprinters are all, they have all their teams behind them. We have the best sprinters in the best form. It's still a little way from the finish, from the top 10Ks and on big roads. I think it would be very difficult for any rider to actually keep their keep whatever gap they take from that climb to the finish line, and I don't think they'd waste their energies, because the same riders that would perhaps do that have more chance of doing well tomorrow, so they may as well put all their eggs in that basket rather than waste energy today on a move that may just simply be a waste.
Frank Schleck from Trek Segafredo just rolling through the picture. Ramonas Navadauskas, Domenico Pozzoviva from AG2R Le Mondial. That's Nathaniel Berhani for Dimension Data, who's done a lot of the early work controlling the pace for the team of Mark Cavendish. Handed over now to Daniel Tekla-Heimanot. These are some of the riders now towards the back of the peloton. Occasionally little gaps opening up, and there's just a threat, just a whiff of crosswind about today, so they'll have to be slightly on their guard. Dan Martin from Ethics Quickstep just moving a little bit faster. First little glimpse of Fabian Cancellara too, and that's Thibaut Pinot just moving through the shots. Matteo Tossato. So big names wherever you look in the peloton of the Tour de France today. The French national champion for FDJ in the tricolour colours, Arthur Vichot. Bunch sprint, very much our expectation today, but complications on the road between here and the finish line in Limoges. 83.1 kilometres remaining and 1:37 the gap. For the first time on this edition of the Tour de France, it's glorious sunshine as we continue to arrow directly south and into the Massif Central. Limoges, the finish line of today's stage, just under 80 kilometres from this point. The quartet of riders up the road have 1 minute and 47 over the peloton, which is being led by a combination of teams. Tinkoff looking after the yellow jersey for a second day of Peter Sagan. Dimension Data looking after the green jersey ambitions, and another stage win in the offing, perhaps, for Mark Cavendish. And what a remarkable haul that would be if he manages to win the first 3 out of 4 on this edition of the Tour de France. That really would be exceptional. The last winner here in Limoges, well, the race came here as a Finnish town 16 years ago in 2000, and it was a rider by the name of Christophe Agnolotto. And David, I think he's a rider, well, you were in that race, you wore the yellow jersey after the prologue of that race. I don't know if you remember that stage, but you remember the man.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those weird facts when we were riding here this morning. I just kind of remembered it. It's one of those things that's in your head and you completely forget about it until you're there in that situation. And I thought, Agnolotto's won here in Limoges. And then I looked it up and I was surprised to find I was right. I could remember it. He was on the Casino team. God, I haven't even checked that fact actually, but I think that's the case. And I'm fairly sure he clipped away near the end. And yeah, it was... I remember he used to be kind of one of those riders that was there, and then oddly, serendipity, I haven't seen him in years, and very strange, I was just walking through the zone technique where we are now, and just bumped into him before commentary and was just having a chat to him. I haven't spoken to him in years, so there you go. It's like that sometimes. It's just all comes flooding back in moments, but yeah, so it's a stage that we don't come to, but we don't actually race much around here. Pro cycling doesn't come to this region much because it is one of the sparser regions in France. It's quite central. It's heading to the Massif Central. There's the Tour Limousin. There's a Paris-Nice occasionally comes in this general direction, but no. So it's and the finish we have today is the stages we've done before haven't finished exactly here. They've been in different places, in different races. We have done a couple of times. So it's going to be a great sprint, but it's not one that anybody really knows that well.
It's wonderful the way the Tour de France does that. Yesterday we were honouring André Darrigade because the stage started in Granville, which was the scene of his first ever stage win of his 22 on the Tour de France. And therefore he was brought back to prominence for the day. And so too Christophe Agnolotto today, having been the last man to win here in Limoges. Of course, this is the home of the Limousin cow. That's where that breed of cattle comes from. And we were delighted, weren't we, to be joined yesterday by Robbie McEwen, who came up with that absolutely fantastic story about having won a Limousin cow after winning a stage of the Tour de France. It's presented to him, and then promptly selling it for €1,500 to Bernardino, which is a terrific story. And it was only later, when we were recording our podcast, that Chris Boardman chipped in with a story about one of his teammates, actually, Frédéric Moncassin, who also on a stage of the Dauphiné was presented with a cow, and it was promptly offered behind the podium €400 to sell the cow straight back to him. But being quite keen on cows, he decided that he'd hang on to it instead. And just delving into your little book, the secret guide of the Tour that you bought here in the streets of Limoges, another story that relates to Chris Boardman and Frédéric Moncassin, I'm just reading about on page 70, relates to the 1994 prologue, which of course was won by Chris Boardman, his first ever win on the Tour de France in that record time. But the day before, Moncassin, who was riding for a different team, at the team presentation in the main square in Lille, was invited along with his teammates onto the podium by Daniel Monjas, the speaker of the Tour, went up onto the podium, slipped on his way down from the podium, broke his ankle and was out of the Tour de France without a stage even being ridden. So there we go. 2 cow stories and 2 Moncassin stories in the space of 2 days. That's what a sleepy day, a relatively sleepy day on the Tour de France can afford you. Now the gap's gone out a little bit, over 2 minutes now, having come down to 1 minute 40. And there, in the field just next to the Tour de France, are some Limousin cattle.
I was just thinking that I know 3 other riders, I think, that have arrived at the Tour de France and had accidents before. I think it was, we see actually 2 others. Matt White came here on reconnaissance, was coming over a start line or going through it, hit a cable and crashed and broke his collarbone. Peter Farrazon was called up. And I think it was Michael Matthews as well, quite recently. Crashed, got up here.
Rings a bell.
And then about the day before. I mean, I think if that happens, you should know you probably weren't supposed to start the race if you're getting knocked out before it even begins. But I always feel sorry for the guys that get called in. I think it was Peter Farrazon for Matt White, who was on holiday, got called up. And for Michael Matthews, it was Christian Meyer that got called up the day before. And it's like, you're on a beach and you get the call to do the Tour de France. Oh.
Lee Howard, of course, was called up at very short notice for I Am Cycling to this edition of the Tour after Dries Stevenens was sick. And he had 24 hours more notice than some of those guys. Of course, Jan Ullrich falls into that category as well as falling into the back of cars. Well, I can't remember which Tour it was, 2005, again on a reconnaissance ride the day before the Tour got underway. Just riding very close to one of his team cars who hit the brakes. He just went straight through over the boot and through the back. And that smashed through the back of the windscreen and dropped into the back seat. But he got himself back on and completed that Tour de France.
It's the last of a Tour de France, it turned out. It was for the 2006 Operation Puerto, where everything kicked off, where my first Tour de France back, and it just all went a bit crazy. But you can see the roads here. This is what it's been like most of the day today for these guys. And I think after yesterday, I don't think any of them. And here we have Vauclair, who's wearing the red dossard, the red number for being the most aggressive rider, stealing that from Fonseca, who'd actually been out there all day. And perhaps Thomas Vauclair was more aggressive, attacking and forcing the race into action. He said this morning in interviews that he did it because he was bored and he felt the whole race was bored, so he wanted to just liven it up a bit. And it's exactly what it did. Him attacking and bridging the 5-minute gap in the space of 10 minutes just going to show how relaxed and shut down the race was at that point in order to be able to close that gap in such a short distance. And then we had that just lit up everybody. That lit up the whole team. Started chasing. Everybody started chasing.
Well, there is a sprint on the horizons at 67.5 kilometres to go. So, 7 kilometres or so from now at a town called Le Dorat. There is an intermediate sprint, and of course there are points available for the first 15 riders, don't forget, over the line, and there are only 4 up the road. So essentially the peloton, when they come through, will be sprinting for 5th place. Time, though, in the meantime, to bring in a guest. We enjoyed a few visits yesterday during the course of the day. I'm delighted to say that a former teammate of David Miller's has joined us as well. Christian van der Velde, we've borrowed you from American Broadcasting. Thanks for coming over. How's your Tour de France shaping up so far?
It's been going pretty good. I mean, it's been a lot of driving, right, David? But apart from that, it's been a great race. Apart from yesterday, it was a little bit of a snooze fest, but the first 2 days was spectacular. And actually, I'm quite surprised with today at how fast they've been riding.
Are you expecting a bunch sprint today? There are 1 or 2 complications, aren't there, between here and the finish line, and it does get a bit lumpy towards the
it does
finish.
it does get a little bit lumpy coming down south into the Massif Central, but I 100% believe that it's going to be a bunch sprint, especially with the likes of Marcel Kittel, Greipel missing out in the first couple of days, so they definitely need the win. It's nice to see Cab finally put the boys back up on the front, and they've been hiding, doing a great job of it. Everyone else has been working, and Cav's been taking all the money.
That's what we were saying the first few days. 'Cause, I mean, Cav spent so many years. I mean, I'm sure we can remember Christian when he just used to be complaining the whole time that no team would help him. Always. He'd have his full team and just be, why doesn't anybody else help? It's like, because you always win, Cav.
Exactly.
And then it's got to the point now where we saw the sort of the last few years where he's been a bit not the Cav, not have the team he's had of old, not being perhaps the Cav of old, the Mark Cavendish, and then all of a sudden it's like he's back now number one, and he's instead of putting the whole team on there, he's playing the game. He's just putting one up almost as a token gesture.
Christian, TJ, how's he going to go from an American? You know, I guess he's your big hope in the absence of any big marquee sprinters. It's all about TJ, isn't it, from an American perspective on this race?
For sure. I mean, they hedged your bets this year, putting Richie up there with him, and I think that's good for like TJ because he has a little bit less pressure on his shoulders. But unfortunately, Richie had a really unfortunate second day there. But yeah, he's going great. He was set to one of the second fastest times and one of the hardest climbs in Switzerland just a few weeks ago. So he obviously has the form. It's a matter of really just keeping his head on and making sure that he's ready to go in those last 4 days in the Alps, because those are absolutely ridiculous. I rode those last weekend, and man, I don't know if I'm just that fat or.
You don't look it. You do not look it, sir. No, not at all. I mean, TJ on the Grand Tours. The breakthrough Grand Tour for him has to happen, and it has to happen this year. Really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not taking anything. I mean, he's twice fifth place. The first time he did it with, working for Cadel, he almost did it by accident. So, I mean, he has all the goods. I mean, I've raced against him head-to-head many times, and the talent is obviously there. It's just following through now and really having that breakthrough, like you say, and get on that podium.
There is a sort of half a generation of young, beg your pardon, sorry, just a frog in my throat there. Half a generation at least of American riders slipstreaming TJ now. You've got such talent at the younger age spectrum. TJ's not old, for heaven's sake. Blimey, he's still got his best years to come. But the likes of Dombrowski and Boswell, etc., well, I mean, they're just ready to take over the mantle, aren't they?
Yeah, Dombrowski really finally stepped it up. He had, he'll admit to it, he had some rough years of his Sky over there. Maybe not ready for the regime over there, and really maybe in 2 years time if he goes back to Sky he'd be a great rider. But yeah, Dombrowski, you have Lawson Craddock, you have quite a few riders who are really ready to step it up. And Lawson Craddock is this is his first year coming to the tour, and we expect a lot out of him. He has the right mentality, something I haven't really seen in a while from the American guys. He just has that just go get it attitude. He's going to be out there.
Indeed, he's a real talent, and he's going to be good to watch, Lawson Craddock. Christian, thank you very much for your time. Sorry, didn't we have slightly longer for you? Good luck with the rest of the tour. I'm sure we'll drag you in and make use of you in a further occasion. Thanks very much, Christian.
Thank you.
Alberto Contador still nursing those bandages, but bit by bit the bandages are coming off, and it's another day for Contador and those riders who have hit the deck and are just feeling their way back into form to recuperate slightly. A shake of the head from the yellow jersey of Peter Sagan, still smiling, still enjoying his race, and very much in with a chance of another stage victory today, alongside Andre Greipel, who will be bitterly disappointed to having lost out to Mark Cavendish in such dramatic circumstances yesterday.
You have to say, as pure bunch sprints go, this is the type that does kind of suit Peter Sagan a bit more than the flat ones we've seen. Even yesterday, although it pitched up a little bit, it wasn't so much. Had that kind of sweeping corner, and then the first day was pan flat, completely flat, and a long run into it. But this one is a little bit, although it's big boulevards, it's a little bit more technical. It's a little bit more kind of almost tactical. We were wondering whether you're going to have to sit a bit further back and use it as a launch pad, because what will happen is, because they're coming off this slight descent in the last couple of Ks up to 600 meters to go, they're going to be hitting the kind of bottom of it at almost 80 kilometers an hour. And the guys at the front are just going to be slowing down. There's going to be a sea of riders, depending on the strength of the lead out, which I think will have mostly been used up because it is such a big run and high-speed running. It's going to be the guy who's got the coolest head, and at the moment you'd say that's Mark Cavendish. But at the same time, if it's a pure drag racing, times are perfect because it is such a high-speed power sprint as well as being slightly uphill. Marcel Kittel, but then again, Greipel as well the same, and then Sagan is much like Mark Cavendish, can dance around the wheels and may have the cool head to sit a bit further back and ride up through the guys. But it's very hard to tell, but I would think, and we'll hear afterwards, worry from Mark Cavendish, because he'll have a strategy, and I'm sure each one of these teams and each one of these sprinters will have a strategy for this, so it'll be interesting to see.
Winding up slowly for the first interesting line across the road of the day. intermediate sprint at 67.5 kilometres, just 3k up the road for the quartet of riders who are looking after an advantage that is hovering around just 2 minutes. The pace at the peloton continues to just go up. All the big sprinters teams are represented at the front, just setting the pace and bringing things back, and there will be some sort of a battle for the minor placings after this quartet of riders have swept up the first 4 placings at the only intermediate sprint of the day. Don't forget there are points available for the first 15 riders across that line, and essentially in the peloton they'll be sprinting for 11 points. Mark Cavendish in the green jersey leading the points competition at the moment. Peter Sagan in second place in that competition is in yellow today, and he's got his team up front, but 4 teams sharing the work at the moment. Lotto Soudal for André Greipel, Ethics Quickstep with Julien Vermont doing most of the early work, looking after Marcel Kittel. And Dimension Data have Natneo Bahani representing the team of Mark Cavendish. Bunch sprint very much the expectation today. With the points competition also a factor, there will be some action from the peloton. Of that you can be almost certain. They're just over 1 kilometre further down the road, so the 4 riders in the breakaway are within maybe 2 kilometres now of that sprint point, and these gentlemen have 3 kilometres to go.
What's interesting to see with the makeup of the teams leading the peloton at the moment, with One Dimension Data, One Lotto Soudal, One Ethics Quickstep, is they're really a bit of a cooperative at the moment. Often what happens is that one sprinter's team will bluff it and say, look, we're not going to ride. You guys, you're clearly going well, you do it, and they'll kind of play off each other. But it's clear at the moment, all 3, Marcel Kittel, André Greipel, Mark Cavendish, they all feel that they've all got a vested interest, and none of them's really dominating, none of them has a dominating team. So they're just working together, and then they'll battle it out in the final, which happens very rarely, to be honest. Normally you'd have one team that just takes control, and other teams will play games, but it's quite good to see that.
That archway you see on the horizon where these 4 riders are heading, that's not the intermediate sprint finish line, that is the Flamme Verte, so to speak. The green kite denoting 1k to go to the intermediate sprint point. The rider just leading them through, 32 years old, from Germany, Andreas Schillinger, representing Bora Argon. Yet again, they've managed to get a rider in a breakaway, exceptionally successful so far. The early stages of this Tour de France for the Pro Continental team from Germany. And they've got a German rider in the break. It's a Spaniard, though, who leads them through, and the oldest in that group of riders by some distance, the 36-year-old Markel Irizar. Wonderful rider, very, very loyal domestique. Doesn't get his opportunities all that often to get up the road and show what he's capable of, but he's got that chance today. And Alexis Gougeard, one of the big young talents on the French scene. Stage winner already on a Grand Tour, stage 19 of the Vuelta last year, in only his first Grand Tour, and this is just his second and his debut on the Tour de France, and he's showing his colours. And finally, Oliver Naassen from Belgium, 25 years old again, his first Grand Tour. Got himself a top 10 in Paris-Nice this year on a stage, and last year won a one-day race called La Poly Normande, so beginning to just rack up a few points on his palmares, on his achievements. What sort of battle will there be amongst these riders, or will they just roll through?
I'd imagine they'll roll through. There's not much vested interest for any of them. They're not protecting any team leader regards the points competition. They've been working together for a long time now. There's no point in causing friction by trying to sprint past each other, unless they know there's a prize sometimes there's a prize to be gained on the sprint if you've looked into the book, which maybe the Bora rider knows, and I don't know, sometimes each village will offer something. I've known riders in the past be annoyed by that. They've just rolled through and then find out afterwards there were 18 boxes of champagne available.
Well, the champagne is going to go to Andreas Schillinger from Bora Argon 18, and whatever prize there is or isn't on offer for second place there will be swept up by Oliver Naassen.
What's interesting to see as well from the last few days, we tend to see the same teams in the breaks. In Trek Segafredo, we've seen IAM, we've seen Bora in every break apart from yesterday. And we can very clearly see their team's ambitions. They don't have a clear GC leader. The team's here to win stages, to be active, to be present in the race, and because they're fully aware they won't be able to be present consistently in the mountains, they try to find opportunities where they can. And so far, Bora have been exceptional in making the break. I mean, although it hasn't been so difficult so far to make the break. And we see Etixx Quick-Step, so Marcel Kittel's taking this sprint the most serious out of everyone. He's got 4 guys in front of him. Mark Cavendish is sitting there on his wheel on the left. We just caught a glimpse of him. And that's something that's quite interesting to see that.
Kittel in the green jersey competition sits just 2 points down on André Greipel, so he can just bump himself up, at least temporarily, into 3rd place in that competition with a good result here. There he is in 4th wheel at the moment, with 3 men in blue leading him out. On his wheel, the green jersey of Mark Cavendish, with the yellow jersey of Peter Sagan behind him, and André Greipel at the back. And there is your distillation. And Marcel Kittel, sorry, the only man with his domestiques still leading him out.
You saw Bernie Eisel just let the wheel go, and look at Sagan going up, so he's interested in getting these points, so he's been quite active about this one, which we haven't seen so far. We haven't seen a full sprint. Now Mark Cavendish, I think, is doing as usual, just sitting on the wheel, just being conservative. Look at him, just protecting, just guarding his position, Mark Cavendish. But Peter Sagan really went for that, and Marcel Kittel got the full lead out and still got rolled by Peter Sagan. So that's interesting. Now that's saying something, whether Marcel Kittel really isn't firing that well, because the commitment his team just showed, you'd expect him to actually go for it and score the maximum points available. You know, Peter Sagan came by quite easy. Look at him coming up here on the right now. Watch Mark Cavendish. Mark Cavendish could have come off his wheel at any moment. Marcel Kittel's there on the left, and I think he decided it was going to have to be too big an effort for him to get by Peter Sagan. So Peter Sagan's made the decision that he wants those points, and he clearly doesn't like being not in his Scott yellow jersey, but he's just making a statement that he is going after this green jersey.
Well, if he stays upright, Peter Sagan surely will be the green jersey winner for the 5th consecutive year on the Tour de France, and he still means business in this competition. He's just closed a 7-point gap by a factor of 2 to Mark Cavendish, so that has shrunk now to just 5 points in the green jersey competition. That was the town of Lordorat. We have just under 67 kilometres before we hit the finish line in Limoges, and the gap is coming down all the time to the 4 riders up the road. Back on the road to Limoges, and it's a nice counterpoint from yesterday's inaction. This is rattling along at a very good tempo indeed. Driven on by a quartet of riders who've still got a 2-minute advantage over the chase, but there's only 61.6 kilometres to go. Alexis Goujard moving to the front, and Andreas Schillinger, the man he's just passing on the road now, having taken maximum points at the intermediate sprint at Le Dorat, some 6 kilometres further back. The next line that they cross is the only categorised climb of the day. It's the Cap 4 Côte de la Maisonneuve. And for Cap 4 climbs on this edition of the Tour de France, there's only 1 mountain point available. None of these 4 riders up the road today have got any mountains points, so none of them can affect the overall lead in the King of the Mountains competition of Jasper Stuyven from Trek Segafredo, who did the damage and gained himself 4 points on stage 2 into Cherbourg in some style as well. Jasper Stuyven is the kind of rider who, should it appear slightly more complicated on the run into Limoges today, who could just go off the front and launch a solo attack, should that happen. Do you think anyone's going to have a go? I mean, you very much doubt that if someone does, it'll be successful, but do you expect to see people trying nonetheless?
I don't think so. My gut feeling is no, simply because the run-in is, there's such big roads, and there's so much at stake for these big sprinters at the moment. We can see the battle royale that's been going on, and it's quite a rare occasion in Tour de France to have stages like this that really are conducive to the sprinters. It's like the old days. They mix it up so much of late that the sprinters have to seize these days and take advantage of them. And I think everybody in the peloton will know that it would be incredibly hard, nigh impossible to break away in a final like this. The running's going to be some of the fastest that any of these guys have ever done before. To be perfectly honest, I think they'll be touching over 80 kilometers an hour in that last K, running into the last 500 meters.
FDJ leader Thibaut Pinot just on the wheel of Warren Barguil, the other young French GC talent riding for Giant Alpecin. Pinot gave some interviews to the French media suggesting that he fancied going on a solo rampage and winning a sprint and being led out today, but he was joking.
I was going to say
it's a good old cycling joke.
Yeah.
No, he's very much flagged up the fact that tomorrow is a day for the general classification. Not a big one, not a big shake-up, not a match-winning, race-winning, tour-winning day, but a day when you can do some damage, for sure.
Yeah, tomorrow is going to be a very interesting stage as well. It's hence why all the sprinters teams are so committed today, because none of the sprinters really stand a chance tomorrow in tomorrow's stage. So they've got all their eggs in this basket, and then all the guys that would perhaps have considered attacking the final today, they won't bother because they'll save it all for tomorrow. That's what stage racing is. You pick and choose your battles, and we know the battle today is amongst sprinters, and tomorrow will be more like the classics riders, the Alaphilippes, Dan Martin, that type of Valverde's. It's a perfect day for them tomorrow.
Into La Brousse with 59.1 kilometres to go, and 3 kilometres into the Côte de la Maisonneuve, the slightly irrelevant Category 4 climb. However, somebody in this quartet of riders is going to pick up a mountain point, and that makes them a player, at least temporarily, in the King of the Mountains competition, however slight that might be.
You would expect Iratxa to do this because it's that's the sort of the role of a teammate when they're in the move like this. If your teammate is in one of those classification, it's up to you as with a team duty to defend their position by not allowing anybody else to get those points. So I'd expect to see Iratxa trying to go for that this one mountain point.
Trek Segafredo have the jersey, and Irizar is up the road to defend its honour and to defend Jasper Stevens' position there. Deny anybody else the opportunity of closing the gap to him. Nathanael Bani is the rider on the front for Team Dimension Data. Behind him, Lars Bak and Thomas de Gent doing most of the donkey work in the early stages for Lotto Soudal, before they then hand over to Andre Greipel, and he brings players like Jürgen Rollens and Jens de Bucheret into play for his lead-out, and his lead-out has to get things right today, Andre Greipel, because it hasn't quite functioned so far.
So what's been quite interesting as well, I mean, there's been quite a lot. Lotto Soudal, they've definitely been the team that have been doing the most work. They've really been making their presence felt from stage 1, stage 3 they did the same. So sorry, stage 2. They're always there on the front, and you have to wonder whether whether Greipel's a little bit nervous or confident. I mean, it can go both ways. But it's also a little bit of a waste of energy if you think. But at the same time, Lars Bak, who we see most in the front, there only seems to be really one rider from the team riding. But it does put them in a precarious position. It does announce to the rest that they're really chasing it. We see just one Dimension Data rider there. Etixx Quickstep have now pulled off completely. And the other sprinters' teams almost go, you know what, you want to do it, you do it. That's good for us. You now control the race, and we'll save as many of our riders as we can for the very final part of the race when it's most necessary.
The kilometres are ticking down, 57.1 to go. Top of the climb is at 55.5, so just under 1.5 kilometres from now. Watch the rider in second wheel, Markel Irizar. He does look attentive as he sits on Oliver Nason's wheel, and it does suggest that he means business and wants to get over this King of the Mountains point in first place. Andreas Schillinger, though, having taken the intermediate sprint, will probably try and contest it as well, and Alexis Goujar makes up that quartet as well. 56.4k. Further back down the road, it's mostly Lotto Soudal on the front with Dimension Data. And there are no blue jerseys, as David just indicated, for Marcel Kittel and Etixx Quickstep at the moment, anywhere near that front end of the peloton. So 1 kilometre to go until the top of the King of the Mountains now, and Goujar takes things up. It's 1.2 kilometres in total this climb, and an average gradient of 5.6%, so it's not exactly Alpe d'Huez. But wherever there's a finish line painted, if it's raced, it's going to hurt. So it is an effort, despite the moderate nature of this climb. It just becomes a sprint.
And to put it in perspective, that's the average gradient of this is just only a little bit steeper than what the finishing 500 meters are, so you can get an idea of what it's like. And when I saw it this morning, it reminded me very much of the Copenhagen final 800 meters from the World Championships back
That's
in
the first thing you said,
2011.
Actually. You said it's just like Copenhagen, yeah.
Yeah, which was. It didn't necessarily appear like that on TV, and when you look back at the images, it just appears like a normal bunch sprint, but it was very heavy, and it did have a gradient to it. And so and just because it's like that doesn't mean it doesn't suit the sprinters. These guys can sprint uphill as well, especially when it's such a short period. That's going to be. Let me think they're going to be hitting it at 70, 80 kilometers an hour. It's going to be over in less than 30 seconds, 25 seconds sprint. And if they time it right, only 10, 15 seconds. So it does end up being, when they're kicking out at 200 meters, they're still probably going to be going 55, 60 kilometers an hour, just with the momentum they have from that descent into it.
Nielsen on the front now for IM Cycling. And behind him, Markel Irizar, probably the man to watch on this King of the Mountains. Yeah, that finish in Copenhagen is consistently underestimated by spectators and people watching on, isn't it? No one quite understood what that gradient was doing when Mark Cavendish triumphed and won himself the Rainbow Bands back in 2011. David Miller, part of that team that helped him do it as well. Irizar just bobbing on his wheels, on his pedals, behind Oliver Naesen. There's the crest. There is the finishing line. Is anybody going to open up a sprint here? Or are they just going to roll through? Not much at stake, but they're racers.
So Irizar's in his drops. Irizar's in his drops in second position, number 63. So that would imply he's going to. He's checking around. Here we go. There you go. So it's his job to defend that for his teammate. He's not going after it for personal reasons. He's doing that because his teammate is in the Mountains jersey. So he just wants to make sure nobody else gets that point. Because at 1 point, it means there's one less person to defend in the future days. Although, to be perfectly frank, tomorrow it all changes because they're actually hitting some fairly decent climbs tomorrow. So 1 point's going to mean nothing.
Wonderful bike rider, Markel Irizar. I had the pleasure of his company a couple of years ago at an event, and he's got a hell of a story to tell as well. A testicular cancer survivor from 14 years ago, I think it was, 2002, a long time ago since he recovered from that terrible illness. And a wonderful bike rider he is too, and a loyal domestique. Doesn't win much in his own right, helps other people win. Julien Vermot for Etixx Quick-Step. So they do have a rider at the front now, joining in. And at the back end of the race, there's Adam Yates in the blue of Orica Bike Exchange with the number 209 on the back. Haven't seen much from Yates yet, but then again, the territory of the Tour de France hasn't allowed us to see much of him. Tomorrow might well be a day where we get to see what Adam Yates is all about on this edition of the Tour de France. Might suit him fantastically well. And at the front end, Vermot, the Belgian domestique. He and Elio Kaiser do most of the early work for Etixx Quick-Step. Natnael Dahani is on duty in the early work, along with Daniel Tekla-Heimenot. No sign of Daniel Tekla-Heimenot having a tilt just yet at the King of the Mountains competition. He held the jersey for 4 years. For 4 days last year. And he won the King of the Mountains on the Dauphiné last year and this year. But we haven't seen much of him just yet. Dimension Data, though, we've seen plenty of them. And shortly, I'm pleased to tell you, we will be able to have a word with Doug Ryder, the general manager of Dimension Data, on what has been a hugely successful year for him and for their team already. 2 stage wins already, and they have the green jersey on the shoulders of Mark Cavendish, and who knows what might happen as Julien Vermot leads them over the last King of the Mountains of the day, the only one in fact, for Etixx Quick-Step, and Dimension Data take the lead. So we'll be hearing from Doug Ryder the other side of a short commercial break. Only just over 50 kilometres remaining and 1:42 the advantage. A mixture of teams still working hard to bring this back. One of those teams is the team of Mark Cavendish in the green jersey today, Dimension Data. And team principal Doug Ryder, the man who's brought this team into existence and its meteoric rise through the rankings to the Tour de France. Of course, a stage win last year with Steve Cummings, and now this blistering start with their new signing, Mark Cavendish, to this edition of the race. Doug, you've joined us for a wee while now. You must have, even with your high expectations of Mark Cavendish, this must have blown you away, this start that you've had.
No, it has, absolutely, and thanks. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is with Brits and Africans, because last year Steve on Mandela Day we couldn't have written that story better, and now the success of Mark Cavendish, it's amazing. So yeah, super happy for him, of course, because he's the consummate professional and he's worked so hard on the track and on the road. which I think has really helped his performance, quite frankly. Rolf Aldag and I were talking last night, and Rolf was saying, well, we think Mark Cavendish's success this year and in this Tour de France, 50% we owe to British cycling and the hard work and focus he's had on the track. So, good job there.
I mean, when you signed him, did you sense that his career needed a kind of a reboot? And has that happened in any sense?
So Mark and I met for the first time last year, the day after the Tour de France. We'd never spoken before, and that was when we met for the first time. And Mark actually said he was looking for a team. He saw the amount of interest in our team during the Tour de France and other races, and he said that in the Quick-Step bus last year, with our Eritrean fans, there was such talk about how cool our team is, because our fan base was like just off the charts mad, and he was like, geez, imagine riding for that team. It's really, they look relaxed. And of course, Steve Cummings is one of his best friends, and Steve says, Mark, this team gives every rider an opportunity to be successful, and it's relaxed. It's not all about performance. So if when Steve went 10th in the prologue, of the Tour de France last year, we drank champagne because it was our first top 10 ever in a Tour de France.
Yeah.
And so we celebrated a 10th place, and the riders on our team were saying, you're celebrating a 10th place. I said, I know, it's crazy. It's our first top 10 in the Tour de France. And they were like, well, that's not normal. What's wrong with you? So I think that's the difference.
Doug, I haven't had a chance to talk to Mark. I'm not really talking to him at all during the race. Just occasional message, and that's it. That we were watching the sprint yesterday, the bike throw. It looked like, the timing was perfection.
Yeah.
Has he spoken about that? So is he fully aware, just getting that so right?
No, he's so aware of and acutely aware of his surroundings. But, if you look at it, and we analysed every hundredth of a second of that bike throw, and at the end with Greipel, and to see what was that, the golden nugget that gave him the victory, and it wasn't the bike throw, and it was because he went 200ths of a second later, he threw his bike, and Greipel had stopped, and he was still charging forward. If you look after the line, Mark went, freewheeling uphill straight past Greipel, and we checked on his Garmin that he had a 59.8 kilometer speed as he hit the line, and if you think it's
uphill.
60k an hour uphill,
Yeah, it's rapid.
it's rapid. And today's the same again. Today is a bit harder than yesterday, but
It is.
and Mark says, if he says to the team, he says, guys, if you bring me to the front at high speed, I have a chance, and that's the key with him.
Have you seen his mood change in the last few days? Kind of going back to, I've known him from a few years ago, and I know what he's like when he's at his best. He becomes edgy, and also when he's a very talismanic figure within a team. Have you seen that there's anything changed in the last few months, in the last few days?
Well, I think he's been super relaxed around us. Just his profile and presence in our team has added huge value in terms of mentorship to our other riders, and also, just the focus and the contributions to the Quebec charity have skyrocketed. The day Mark announced he was joining our team, the daily donations went up fourfold. So that's the power and the presence of that kind of guy. And he's openly loves it and talks about it and does so much. And I think, because there's no pressure to perform, and we don't sit there with a mandate to him to say, if you don't win, that's going to be tough for us. I think it drives him to his best, and he's been very casual. He's what Mark's like when he does well, and he thanks all his teammates, and he's so good like that, and that really lifts this whole team up. And our guys hadn't experienced that before, so he's been an incredible mentor, and an addition to our team. I've been asked many times before the tour, are you a bit disappointed because Mark hasn't won so much and Edvald's won more, and what is the role going to be? And I'm saying, the fact that he just inked pen to paper with us was already a win for us. So everything over and above that is a bonus, and this Tour de France has been exceptional.
Doug, he's got a really complicated calendar, hasn't he? Not just over the next 2.5 weeks,
Yep.
Mark Cavendish, but going forward in the Olympic Games, etc., and his selection there. Now, that was something of a conflict in his last team with Patrick Lefevre. It was quite open that Lefevre didn't want him, to ride on the track. How do you stand with that? And do you want this rider to go all the way to Paris? And does he want to do that? So that's the key question.
So absolutely, and Mark came with major goals. And we said that we would support those goals and believe in him, and give him the opportunity to do that. And he's the consummate professional. He does an incredible amount of work, and he's an amazing guy. So his work ethic is unbelievable. But so I think his schedule is tough going forwards. But I've never seen a guy work harder, and I'm hoping that he's successful. And going to Paris, you know, Mark, if he wins today, if he doesn't win today, I mean, he wants to get closer to, you know, to be an all-time great in the Tour de France, and I think we'll see him in Paris.
And yeah, I suspect the same, because he's an emotional guy. You know that, we know that, David knows that. He's raced with him, and Paris means something to him, doesn't it?
But if you look at the Tour, 1,700 kilometers to the first race day. This Tour de France is so hard. 9 days of racing, 1,700 kilometers to the first race day. There hasn't been a tour like that in years. And then the second week is like 1,100, and then the third week is only 600. So from the second race day to the finish is 600 kilometers of climbing. Sure, a lot of mountains, but is that a, you know, it's not 250 kilometers with 10 cols, okay, which is a killer for a guy like Mark. It's doable. And so he's looking at that, and we've analyzed, I mean, as a team, we analyze every stage in detail. You know, he's excited, actually. But a sprinter takes each day as it comes, and like we said before this tour, we'll come into this race hot, like it only was a week long, and it was a great strategy.
Well, listen, I wish you all the best for the rest of the tour. Thanks for joining us, Doug. It was amazing to watch you right alongside Mark Cavendish when he crossed the line yesterday. No one's quite sure whether he'd won or not, and you were the first man there pretty much on the spot to congratulate him. So, listen, well done.
Thank you very
well
much.
done on signing a great rider as
I know.
well. You must be delighted with your tour. Good luck, Doug.
Thank you very much.
Joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So we are anticipating a big bunch sprint. It's on the road now to Limoges. The quartet haven't been caught, but their advantage is being whittled away at all the time. 1 minute and 11 seconds for Naesen, Gouchard, Irizar and Schillinger. 45 kilometres to go. The three big-name sprinters have got their teams all at the front. Kittel, Greipel, Cavendish, but what about the yellow jersey himself, Peter Sagan? He surely will want to be in the mix too. This all to come. It's going to be great. We're going to get a short break out of the way and be back with the action. Welcome back. 40.6 kilometres to go, 57 seconds the advantage, and another team has joined the action at the front of the peloton to bring the four riders up the road back into the fold. Won't be just yet the catch, but it will be imminent at some point between here and the finish line in Limoges. There are a few lumps and bumps to negotiate, as you can see from that helicopter shot. This is not flat territory. We're in the Haute-Vienne region, just on the foothills of the Massif Central, which is mountainous. The wind is up, the speed is high. Julien Vermont is on the front for Ethics Quickstep. The man in second wheel, though, is familiar to us all, Thomas Voeckler, riding in the breakaway yesterday. A two-man breakaway that was caught in the closing stages of yesterday's rather pedestrian opening phase. And that's Brice Fayou from Fortuneo Vital Concept, who had another rider in that breakaway move. Brice Fayou himself a former stage winner on the Tour de France. Thomas Voeckler, well, that's interesting, isn't it, that Direct Energie have joined in alongside Lotus, Soudal, Ethics Quickstep and Dimension Data. They are interested in getting their man a result today.
Well, we saw Brian Coquard yesterday get third place, and a strong third place as well. He went a bit late, he was moving up, and so I think that will have filled him with confidence, and that's often what it takes. It takes a sprinter to make a fine performance like that to force their team to work. As horrible as that sounds, it's the truth. When you see a sprinter start to lose their powers, you also notice their team begin to lose their desire to ride on the front for them and set them up. And that's, to be honest, that's just the way it is. But we're seeing today, this is a great opportunity for Brian Coquard. The sprint, the gradient is very similar to yesterday, a slightly different run-in. But this is sort of style of sprint he wouldn't generally have. He wouldn't consider himself against Greipel and Kittel and Cavendish on a pan-flat sprint to be able to stand a chance to beat them. But to be perfectly honest, I don't see why he shouldn't believe in himself on a stage like today.
Well, clearly he does, and that's why the patron of his team, the main man, the man whose achievements have single-handedly kept that team afloat, frankly, over the last 10 years, Thomas Voeckler, and there he is, right on cue. And that picture dates back to that amazing run in the yellow jersey in 2004, when he was riding in the colours of Europcar. But Voeckler is on domestique duty for Brian Coquard, so another big-name sprinter with a French passport to consider in the shake-up on today's stage. Should it be a bunch sprint, of course, and that's not a totally foregone conclusion. There are uncategorised climbs to come, most significantly, and because it's not categorised, we don't know exactly where it comes on the race, but we think at around about 10 kilometres to go. There's a kilometre or so of climbing that has to be negotiated by the sprinters' teams. And it might just be that one or two riders take the opportunity, if things go their way, to launch a surprise attack and try and get away. Such a rapid descent into Limoges, and big wide roads would mean that would be a very, very outside chance of having success.
And yet we can see today, much like yesterday, how much the peloton is racing for a bunch sprint today. It's 39 kilometers to go. This break of 4 riders has less than a minute, and that's not normally the case. Normally they'd have more time at the moment, and they'd intend to catch them. They'd leave it out and then bring it back. But there's no risks being taken by the sprinters teams. They don't want to make their life more difficult. They want it to be a bunch sprint today, and they're going to make sure that happens.
So those 4 riders have been out there, not immediately today. It took a little while for the breakaway to get established today, about half an hour of racing before those 4 did get up the roads. But nonetheless, the battle to get in the breakaway hasn't been as intense as you often see in the early stages of the Tour de France. And those 4 got away relatively lightly, and they've been out there most of the day, the longest day on the Tour de France in this edition, 232.5 kilometres. And Alexis Goujiard, rather surprisingly, is just dropping off the back. The strong young rider from AG2R Le Mondial looks like his day is done. Looks cooked, which is something of a surprise. But he is, on the other hand, coming back from injury. He crashed heavily on the Dauphiné and required 10 stitches to his, I think it was his left leg. So he's just feeling his way back into form as Goujiard.
That is surprising, but at the same time, it goes to show how fast the breakaway is now going. They've obviously accelerated, seeing the pelotons moving up, and to the degree normally what happens is it splits apart over time. You don't often see a rider dropped as clearly as that from a breakaway, which is definitely showing that these 3 now 3 are going as hard as they can. There's no playing games.
So a German, a Spaniard and a Belgian rider in the middle. That's Oliver Naesen from IM Cycling, a team that is ceasing to exist at the end of the year, and a lot of the riders on that squad are looking for new contracts. And it's a good time to show your colours and show what you're all about and get in a move. Oliver Naesen's doing just that today. Marc Irizar, well, he's at the other end of his career, 36 years of age. Domestique so often put to use by Fabian Cancellara in the Spring Classics. Irizar, and again showing what he can do in the breakaway. And Schillinger, Andreas Schillinger from Germany, makes up the 3 with Goujiard dropping back. Convoy of cars is still there, so the cars haven't been pulled out of the gap, but it is closing all the time. I don't think they'll want to catch them just yet, will they, David? Seems a bit early.
I wouldn't have thought so, but like I said, I believe that the peloton is so convinced and committed that the only thing that matters today is the bunch sprint, that perhaps the teams have simply got a little bit carried away, and it's academic at this point whether it's caught early or late. There's so many teams that want this to be a bunch sprint that there's no fear of a move breaking away in theory.
That's the solitary figure of Alexis Goujiard going backwards to the peloton, and some way further down the road there is a big chase developing. And pretty soon there'll be a catch. Welcome back as we look down at the extraordinary site of the village of Oradour-sur-Glane, the site of an atrocity towards the end of the Second World War in 1944, and left in ruins on the order of French President Charles de Gaulle to be maintained as a permanent memorial to the events there.
Yeah, it's a tragic story. It was an SS battalion that were trying to put an end to their mission of repression in the region. They used this village essentially as an example, and they ended up rounding up all the men and killing all them, and also tragically and horribly killing 205 children, 240 women, and the 197 men who were killed first, and then destroying the whole village. And it was then President Jacques Chirac who in 1999 decided to make it a martyr village, essentially, was what it was called, a village martyr. and in order for it to never be forgotten. But they'd already made a decision after the war that it shouldn't be rebuilt in order for the memory to remain. So definitely one of the darkest moments in the Second World War. And yeah, there's many there were, but this one is one that they wanted to keep. Not like Saint-Lô, which we saw at the beginning of the race, where one of the stages started. It was where they rebuilt it. They decided with this one not to rebuild it.
Thomas Voeckler heads affairs. 50 seconds. The gap. The chase is still on. Lotto Soudal, Ethics Quickstep, Direct Energie. Dimension Data, for now, content to hand things over to the other teams. Direct Energie do have their big guns there. Sylvain Chavanel, their new signing, working as well to try and set things up for their young, talented sprinter, Brian Coquard, in the form of his life, actually. His best season by some distance. Brian Coquard ratcheting up the wins, albeit not at World Tour level, but getting closer and closer all the time. Third place for him yesterday, behind that extraordinary finish between André Greipel and Mark Cavendish. 31.2k to go, so it does go up and down all the way and switches back. The route becomes a little bit more complicated now as we roll into much more lumpy terrain. No mountains to speak of, but hills for sure, and a climb to just watch out for around about 20 kilometres further up this twisting, undulating road, some of which has been resurfaced there. They're on a very new section of tarmac there, as so often happens on the Tour de France.
That is one of the... Actually, I don't know whether it's a privilege or a duty. For the locals, it's a privilege. It's a duty for the local organisers. The Tour de France expects the roads to be resurfaced, and so it's for many of the riders racing, they take it for granted. But for many of the villagers and the locals, it's an amazing blessing after many years to get their road surfaced thanks to the Tour de France.
Just 45 seconds now, the advantage, so it's coming down ever so slightly. 15 seconds have been knocked off over the last 5 or 6 kilometres. Continues to fall. 3 riders left. Markel Idizaar picked up the only King of the Mountains point on the route today, defending the polka dot jersey essentially and making sure that nobody did any damage to the hopes of Jasper Stuyven, the man who holds that jersey, his teammate. Beautiful, clear blue skies for once on the Tour de France. It's been a gloomy start up in Normandy in terms of the weather, blistering racing, but now as we continue to head south, the sun is beginning to shine and the clouds are beginning to roll back, and this breakaway is continuing to be reeled in now by Lotto Soudal. Once again, Katusha riding for Alexander Kristoff, the birthday boy, the Norwegian sprinter, 29 years old today, and he hasn't really made his mark on the Tour de France yet. André Greipel, the Lotto Soudal rider, for whom Lars Bak is setting the pace now at the front of affairs, will be frustrated, and he'll be looking to gain revenge over Mark Cavendish for just edging him out by, what was it in the end, just a handful of 0.010 of a second. It was a tiny margin of victory, but enough to get Cavendish a second stage win, and he's going to want a third today.
It's, by Alexander Kristoff's standards, he's been practically invisible so far in the sprints, and you'd expect him normally at his best for this to be a sprint that would really suit him. And amongst the sprinters, he's renowned as being a very powerful sprinter, which essentially means when it's heavier going after a hard race, after a classic, or in the uphill sprints, he really is one of the best in the world. So you would have considered today's stage to be perfectly suited to him. But as we've seen now, it's actually probably just as suited to all of them. None of them really know. We're going to find out soon enough. But yeah, he obviously feels quite confident, hence, or just he's desperate, hence why he's put teammates on the front. So I wouldn't have said that's really necessary. But it's his birthday, so maybe he's just feeling invigorated by the whole day.
And we're invigorated by the sunshine and the glorious scenery here as the slate roofs of northern France give way to terracotta tiles, roof tiles. That's a sure sign that we're heading south as we look down at the bridge of Saint-Victorien. Yeah, Alexander Kristoff, what a powerful Palmares he already has. But that said, it's not been his most effective year. Just 6 wins to date, one of which was disputed live on television by Mark Cavendish only yesterday after his stage win. when he suggested that one of those victories on the Tour of Qatar actually went his way and not Alexander Kristoff's. However, the record books say that was Kristoff's win. 6 wins to date for him, but it's been a couple of years since he made his mark on the Tour de France, winning twice in 2014, the same year he won Milan-San Remo, and of course he won the Tour of Flanders the following year. So some achievements Alexander Kristoff has to date. Will it be his race today? Well, if he's going to win, he's going to have to win against the very best competition in the world, because Kittel, essentially, for most of this season, has been in the form of his life. Andre Greipel, indisputably, with 3 stage wins on the Giro d'Italia, also in the form of his life, the reigning German road race champion. And Mark Cavendish, back to the best form of his life as well. So this is some sprinters' field assembled here.
We've talked about it for years, of the lineup of potentially having all the best sprinters going head-to-head, and there seems to have always been a missed opportunity, one of them crashing, one of them being injured, one of them sick, one of them simply not being present. And these last few days and today, it really is the first time we're getting to see these world-class, the world's best sprinters actually sprinting head-to-head. And amazingly, and not surprisingly really, Mark Cavendish is coming out on top.
Yeah, it's a great era for sprinting. It's not just those big war horses that we've been talking about, the Kittels and the Cavendishes and the Greipels, who we know all about. There's another generation just emerging hot on their heels as well. Not represented at the Tour de France, but will feature massively in the years to come. Fernando Gaviria, the Colombian talent, and Caleb Ewan, to name but 2. Brian Cockard, for whom Direct Energie are riding today, and they also have belief in him. He belongs to that younger generation as well. And let's not forget the man who is also absent from the Tour de France, partly of his own mistake in making, the enigmatic, belligerent talent of Nasser Bouhanni, who once again has shot himself in the foot and his team somewhat for Cofidis by injuring his hand in a punch-up in a team hotel. So Bouhanni, one of the big-name absentees, but so much sprinting talent to look forward to on the road, and the run-in towards Limoges, and a fast and furious denouement. Strung out and snaking through the Haute-Vienne towards an inevitable conclusion. That's what they'll be hoping, the big sprinters teams, as Julien Vermont leads them through. Up and down the road, twists and turns now, pretty much all the way into Limoges, and on the outskirts of Limoges it broadens out as they will shoot downhill towards that finishing kilometre, and then uphill the last 600 metres or so, up a significant gradient. Sometimes in cycling you refer to uphill as a drag, and sometimes it's a climb. What's this?
Sometimes it's a false flat, sometimes
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a kicker.
It's a kicker. Is this a drag or a climb, David?
I'd say this is a drag. This
Right.
is it's just short enough. If it was longer, it would be a false flat climb. So yeah, often we don't even know the meanings of them. But no, this is definitely a drag of a sprint. But it's difficult to tell whether a Tour de France peloton coming into it, they're coming off a kilometre or more of false flat descent on a boulevard. So they're going to be hitting it with such speed and momentum that it's going to almost annul the fact that it is a drag for certainly the first half of it, and which is going to make it tactically very difficult. But they'll all know, they'll have done, well, they hope they have, that nowadays these sprinters, they do so much research in these finishes. They'll have people ahead radioing back, calling back to the car, telling them what they've seen, backing up the information they already had, be it from previous reconnaissance that they've had people go out and do, or simply Google Maps, etc., that sort of thing. But yeah, they'll know, and they'll have, each team will have their strategy, and then we'll see the difference between the big sprinters, the kind of the great ones. They'll actually be able to action the strategy they have, which is one of the great things that Mark Cavendish is good at, and Greipel. And Kittel, we yet to see that happen, and Sagan's going to be essentially doing it on his own, like we saw yesterday in all the sprints so far. So it's going to be a bit interesting. We'll be able to see quite quickly in those last couple of Ks which each strategy is.
Andreas Schillinger from Bora Argon 18 sets the pace at the front of the 3 remaining riders in the breakaway, who've only got 28 seconds now to look after. And over the brow of the hill, pretty soon you'll see the motorbikes coming over, leading, well, it's Thomas Voeckler on the front for Direct Energie, working for Brian Coquard. And then the other teams represented at the front are the peloton, continue to be Lotto Soudal, Katusha, Ethics Quickstep. Dimension Data have disappeared somewhat. They are not working directly for the front of the race to bring this back. They have been sharing the work, but you can see the green jersey of Mark Cavendish now is down in, what, 25th, 30th wheel, and he's got a couple of teammates alongside him and in front of him.
Which is what he did yesterday so well, and I think well, actually every day so far. He's had Mark Renshaw, Edvald Bersenhagen really as his, and kind of there with him, almost playing a very last minute, which takes such a cool head to do that. So they have to sit there, they have to be well placed. They haven't got teammates to use up and position them. They've got to do all the position themselves, and then they only really come to the forefront in the last 2 kilometres. As Steve Cummings sitting here at the back, Cummings Cam, who'll be waiting with today. So actually tomorrow will be a perfect day for him. So it'll be interesting if that's the sort of biding his time for that.
20 kilometres to go. Lars Bak from Lotto Soudal gets to the front again, and Lotto Soudal continuing to do the lion's share of the work in the latter stages. Bak is beginning to really raise the temperature of this race and the pace being set now. Of course, they're working for Andre Greipel. There's Steve Cummings with tomorrow in mind. His first and so far only stage win, of course, came in the Massif Central up to Mende on last year's edition of the race. So I wonder if tomorrow is a Cummings day. Today, though, most certainly a day for his teammate Mark Cavendish.
I know this is the first time we get to see the peloton. Just got a glimpse of the peloton behind there. We just see it going, about to start that little rise. That was a kicker, by the way. Technical term. Yeah, so it's, these guys are just going to push on as hard as they can and forward. But we saw the peloton really driving forward there. Lars Bak leading it. They're going to keep the pace as high as possible. So I think they know that positioning is going to be, as it always is, so important. But what's going to happen is, because the road is so wide, it's going to be similar to yesterday with different trains forcing it. And we saw a bit of a battle going on between the GC riders and the sprinters in the last 24 hours. The sprinters complaining about the GC riders being up there in the front. As just we see Movistar moving up there on the right. That's exactly what the sprinters aren't liking. But then there's GC teams. The Gs aren't liking the fact that the lead-out guys from sprinters teams are then stopping pedaling after they've done their job and causing splits. And so we're getting this little internal spat going on. And I think they've both got points, but at the same time they've all got a lot to lose. At this point in the race, it's understandable that they're all a little bit apprehensive and getting in each other's way.
So what you're basically saying is that nobody likes anyone else.
A little bit at the moment, yeah. That's sort of that's racing, though, isn't it?
It is.
When you've got numbers on your back anyway, normally you're all reasonably friendly afterwards if you actually talk to each other.
Well, these three are collaborating nicely still, trying to stay away for as long as they possibly can. 2 out of the 3 have scored at the only points available today. The man in second wheel there for Bora Argon 18, Andreas Schillinger, took the intermediate sprint and got himself 20 points in the green jersey competition. And the man on his wheel, Markel Irizar, took the only King of the Mountains point of the day. And Ethics Quickstep are on the front now with Vaclav in second wheel.
And we'll see at the moment it's still the teams are sharing the workload. Movistar on the left, Sky aren't there. At this point yesterday we had Team Sky exactly where Movistar are, on the right hand side of the road. And so in a way Team Sky maybe have paid a little bit of heed to the complaints that were going on and respected that point of view and have removed themselves back a bit, but which would be a fairly tactical move, because it's such a safe run-in in theory with these big roads that there's not much need to be where Movistar are. And it's almost as if Movistar have listened to what the sprinters have said and said, you know what, we don't care, we're going to come from annoy you anyway. But that we're going to see soon whole teams come up there and start driving forward as unified entities.
It's a 3-man team time trial out at the front in the breakaway, and it's a pretty much 3-man team time trial, albeit from different teams in the peloton. Thomas Voeckler, Lars Bak and Julien Vermont for 3 different teams setting the pace. 23 seconds. It's coming down quickly, 16.6k to go. And we are expecting this uncategorized climb to cause a little bit of alarm or consternation or concentration and certainly effort. And that's coming in about 5 or 6 kilometres time. And at this pace, they'll rattle through those kilometres incredibly fast. got something of a tail crosswind at this point that's just blowing them through. The average pace today almost 10 kilometres faster than most of yesterday's antics. In the second longest stage of the Tour, this is the longest itself, and almost by a full hour quicker.
Well, I think that everyone had a fairly easy day relatively yesterday, so they'll all be feeling quite fresh today, and that often will dictate how the racing is. And the fact it took over half an hour for the break to go goes to show just how many people were interested in getting into it, and that set the tone for the day. Whereas yesterday, I think everybody was quite tired and just having a little bit of decompression after those first 3 days of the Tour de France, which are as much energy burning on a nervous level as it is a physical level. And so I think that yesterday was all they needed to recover and get back into it, which is what they've done today. And I think we're going to see the next few days are going to get more and more hectic.
You can see the average speeds there. 43 kilometres an hour for the trio up the road is not shabby at all, but the peloton are flying now. 47 kilometres an hour at this point. So the margins between the Tête de la Course, which means the breakaway, and the peloton further back, they're slight, but every kilometre an hour that the peloton has as an advantage in terms of average speed over these three spells the end in increments for the breakaway. 16 kilometres to go, and the next significant marker is the 15-kilometre banner spread out across the road. That is the point now through 15 kilometres that Markel Irizar takes them, with Schillinger on his wheel and Oliver Naesen from IM Cycling, the young Belgian rider, still there. Alexis Goujard from AG2R Le Mondial was the first of the 4 riders in the breakaway today to lose contact with the remains, and he has dropped back into the peloton. And now the bunch come through, 15 kilometres to go, and Astana have moved Vincenzo Nibali and Fabio Aru alongside Movistar. So the big GC teams have come out to play as well, much to the annoyance of the sprinters teams, I'm sure about that. So no sign of Team Sky at the moment at the front of the race, though.
No, it's a role reversal of yesterday, where the only GC team we saw at the front was Team Sky, and we wondered where Movistar and Astana were. We looked at it and we thought they all seemed a bit scattered, and no doubt their director sportif saw the same thing, and they were reprimanded for it afterwards and have been told you don't let that happen again. So Team Sky, on the other hand, have perhaps realised they didn't need to do that, and they were causing too much conflict within the peloton, so they've retired a little bit and been taken over by Astana and Movistar. So it's yeah, that's the way it goes. I don't think you can't, no matter what the riders say publicly or feel about each other, if their team bosses tell them you have to be at the front, they go to the front.
It's a huge peloton, the Tour de France peloton, still 198 riders involved, and just so many colours and so many teams here. I have not seen on the coverage so far today, David Miller, a single Team Sky jersey. They've been nowhere near the front, which is very, very unusual, isn't it? Even on a relatively benign sprinter stage.
Yes, it is. I mean, we spoke briefly with Dave Brailsford yesterday, and we were talking about how the fact they've changed their style of racing slightly, and they've become more reactive and dynamic rather than robotic. And we're seeing that. I mean, we can't even see them in the back. We don't even know where they are. They're almost undercover. They've gone full
taking a shortcut somewhere, a marginal gain across country somewhere.
But they obviously feel that this very simple run-in by Tour de France standards and by bike racing standards these days, and so they must know it's quite safe. They can see it's got when the peloton's going at this sort of steady pace, all these teams controlling. To be fair, if it keeps this sort of status as it is now, it's actually reasonably safe in there. And the moment that you start all barging around, look at Astana on the right, Movistar there, so it's found its rhythm. Let's see if we see any Sky riders. There they are on the right, just coming up there. So they're coming up slowly, they've got themselves on the side, and you put yourself always on the side of the peloton in order to move up. If you're stuck in the middle, you find yourself in the funnel, being funneled back down through the middle to the back. So you stay on the side and you just wait for gaps to open and you steadily move up.
That's a fantastic shot, isn't it? 3 riders in the break, slowly being reeled in. And here is Limoges, nestling in the Haute-Vienne, not far from the Massif Central now. Not far from the testing climbs to come tomorrow, the Puy-Marie being one of them. Plenty of action on the mountains of the Massif Central to look forward to tomorrow. Some fast and furious action now to look forward to over the next 12.3 kilometres, and some rising tarmac not far up the road for these 3 to contend with, and for the chase as well to control. Lars Bak, so distinctive Featured in L'Equipe, in the main sports newspaper of the day. Lars Bak, the Danish ruler, at the front of the race now, where they detailed the 12 broken bones in his career, including 3 breaks off his right shoulder, his collarbone. And that's why, actually, when you look at him, his right shoulder, look, it's distinctly asymmetrical. He's smashed it to bits. Tough man, Lars Bak. Crashed out on the Giro d'Italia on the very last stage into Turin in the rain. And to his great chagrin and disappointment, wasn't able to complete that Grand Tour back in May. So just 20 seconds to go and 11.5 kilometres remaining. Julien Vermont leading Angel Vicioso from Katusha. Lars Bak, Adam Hansen from Lotto Soudal. So once again, Greipel has his troops on the front. One of Brian Coquart's foot soldiers today, the team captain, the team leader in many ways, Thomas Voeckler, has done his stint for his sprinter and he's just dangling off the back of the peloton and trying to remain in contact. But I would imagine Voeckler will have his work cut out to come over in the same time as the leader today. Got his red numbers on his back after his day out in the breakaway yesterday, given the Prix de la Combativité. Wasn't necessarily a decision you agreed with, actually, David, yesterday.
No, I mean, I think Fonseca had been out there all day and done the lion's share of the painful time off the front and been the first person to attack, etc. But no, I mean, I can understand, though, maybe it was an aggressive move by Thomas Voeckler to go.
Now they're climbing. Andreas Schillinger is out of his saddle and the road is definitely rising here, so just pay attention to how this might thin out proceedings, and it might spell the end for the breakaway as well as they roll through this territory where it does become increasingly testing. And now you can see Angel Vicioso also out of his saddle and stepping on his pedals at the front for Katusha. Team Sky right the way down the pack, just moving up step by step. They are on the right hand side of the road, about halfway down the peloton. Still a rapid pace being set. Markel Irizar for Trek Segafredo, determined to drive this on until they are ultimately caught, as surely they will be. Oliver Naesen still there with them, and so too is Andreas Schillinger. As they pass through 10 kilometres to go. 60 kilometres an hour. I'm not entirely sure that's accurate at this particular point, but it is fast, we can say that much. 16 seconds, that's what they take through 10k to go, and here come the peloton, being led through by Astana at this point.
It definitely looks fairly high speed here, and you can see the cadence. It's I think this slight downhill they had a slight tailwind, hence why that brake's staying away.
The white helmet and the blue jersey just coming into view now is Fabio Aru. Alongside him and in front of him now, Vincenzo Nibali, just keeping himself safe. Movistar are there with 3 or 4 riders around Nairo Quintana. Right-handed and round they go. Incredibly quick, still got 12 seconds. And further back down the road, well, Astana are mixing it right alongside Lotto Soudal and Katusha. So it's a confusion of GC and sprint ambitions at the moment, and no clear discernible pattern in the chase now. And words being exchanged between Lars Bak, who's looking around to see where his team have found themselves and where his sprinter is. There is André Greipel in the white jersey. So he's still got all his troops around him, and Lotto Soudal are very prominent. 8.8 kilometres, and minds are focused now on this technical, difficult finish. Narrow roads here, rolling territory. They're on the outskirts of Limoges, and pretty soon it'll broaden out and they will descend towards the finale. That final kilometre, downhill and then sharply up towards the finish. A straight but very, very testing finale. Vincenzo Nibali right at the front with Astana, thinking perhaps about the 3 kilometre marker, from which point, if anything befalls the GC teams or any of the riders in the race in terms of mechanicals or accidents, their times are neutralised and they won't lose any time. So that is the finish line in many ways for the GC teams, but the sprinters have only one finish line in mind, and that is 8.2 kilometres away in Limoges.
You can see how high speed this is at the moment. This is where Sky were moving up with just the right time, because although it's fairly safe and they're sweeping bends, at the back of the peloton it's going to be strung out and splitting up. At the front you don't necessarily notice it. As you can see with the front riders, they keep looking behind, checking their teams there safely, whereas behind it we're just getting more and more strung out. So this first 40-50 riders are fairly safe, but behind it's going to be kind of, you can see it just thinning out there, you can see they're just getting more and more desperate, and that's why you can never be there as a GC rider.
Now they're still out there, they haven't been caught yet, 7.7k to go, and once again the road rises in front of them. This time it is the turn of Andreas Schillinger to follow Alexis Gougeard and drop back. He'll be swept up incredibly quickly because the chase is hot behind. Angel Vicioso, he's been on the front for Katusha for some time now, just setting the pace at the front with Adam Hansen and Marcel Seeberg on his wheel, and that's the end for Schillinger. He drops back, and then there were only two. And Oliver Nason, well, the pain is really beginning to show on his face. He grits his teeth, and fair play to him as well. This is the little uncategorised climb that they've got to get over before they can descend towards the finishing line. Markel Irizar on his wheel, just holding on to Oliver Nason. And already at the back, well, Rafa Majka has dropped off straight away. Something of a surprise there.
And that's where you can see if you've been at the back where it's strung out, then you hit a rise like this, you've already been at your threshold just trying to hold the wheel and the gap's opening up. Then you hit this rise and you can't close the gap. So that's why you've got to avoid being there. And that's what, although the sprinters may complain about the GC teams being up there amongst it, they have to be if they want to be in the race. They can't get caught behind. There's Alberto Contador moving up on the left, looking a bit like the Alberto Contador we know so well. And I think I had Roman Bardet near him. Looks like also Peter Sagan's got a teammate with him. And there's the Sky train now moving up.
Yeah, Team Sky have moved from almost the back of the peloton right the way towards the front now, and Chris Froome is just being kept safe. He's to the left of that quartet of Sky riders and now just taking his place at the back. That's the end of the breakaway. They've been caught. They shake hands, Nason and Irizar. That's the end of their race, and it has all come back together again with 7 kilometres remaining. The yellow jersey now takes control with Tinkoff and Roman Kreuziger setting the pace with Peter Sagan in third wheel of the Tinkoff train.
An irony of irony after the battle between the sprinter teams and the GC teams. It's the GC teams that have complete control of the race here with 6.8k's to go. So that goes to show sometimes those teams are a bit stronger. The little up height, that little kicker has helped them come to the front, even Alberto Contador. But it's the first time we've seen Peter Sagan in this situation with two or three teammates around him. So that's a good sign, and probably goes to show how motivated they are for him to go for the stage win today.
Those legs will be hurting. Markel Irizar has collected the only King of the Mountains point available today. He's been in the breakaway for 200 odd kilometres, and now it's all come to an end for him. Just wants to get to the finishing line and in Limoges and forget all about it, because his legs will be absolutely stinging. Lotto Soudal trying to reassert themselves now alongside those GC trains, and there's a flat, and it is for Irizar actually, so if it wasn't hard enough for him, he's now got a flat tyre to contend with as well. Now Lotto Soudal are determined to play the big sprinters card here, and Andre Greipel has ordered his team, commanded them, and they are ranging themselves into position again. They've got faith in the German, and the German backs himself. There he is in the white jersey on the left-hand side of the road with 5 of his riders in front of him.
And we can just see at the bottom of the screen the green helmet of Mark Cavendish. So up to now he's been rather conspicuous in his absence, although the teams are up there. Etixx Quick-Step we haven't seen much of either. Lotto Soudal, like the other days, are really taking control, but let's face it, that hasn't really helped them when it's come to the actual finale moment of the race. Looks like at the moment Tinkoff and Team Sky really have control, and I think what we're beginning to see maybe what Mark Cavendish's strategy is to come from behind on the uphill bit, using the momentum from that final K and launch himself forward. But it's a little bit of a risk, and there's very few riders that can pull that off. So the more riders you have in front of you, the more things can go wrong.
It is a confused picture. Lotto Soudal are the only sprinter team at the front at the moment. Although it has to be said, the yellow jersey is a sprinter at the moment. Peter Sagan, well, he can do everything, can't he, Peter Sagan? So Tinkoff are both a sprinter's train and a GC train, looking after, on the one hand, Alberto Contador alongside the likes of Quintana and Nibali, but also looking after and trying to set things up for Peter Sagan, who in the final will have to freelance somewhat. You can see him there in about 10th wheel, the yellow jersey. And
no sign whatsoever of Etixx Quick-Step. I'm wondering if Marcel Kittel's told them it's not happening. Maybe on that rise he felt terrible and has just said, look, look, it's not happening today. So they've just shut it completely down. So that's one less sprinter for them to worry about at the moment. But none of those guys will know about that. They won't be focusing on that. For all they know is he's on their wheel.
Into the outskirts of Limoges now, and it's an aggregate drop from the hills that surround Limoges all the way to the final 600 metres when it kicks back up again. As you say, Etixx Quick-Step nowhere near, but that doesn't mean that Marcel Kittel is not still a force to be reckoned with. It might be a ploy. They might just want to charge the race late, because that would be a tactic that might just work on this unusual run-in to the finish line here at Limoges. Marcel Seeberg, the big German rider for Lotto Soudal, one of about 4 or 5 looking after Andre Greipel. And at the back, it's getting very strung out. Road Furniture making the situation even more complex. John Degenkolb is there for Team Giant Alpecin. They have gone to the front as well with a couple of riders. 4K remaining.
And Orica Bike Exchange. This is a good sprint from Michael Matthews. And Simon Gerrans there. It's Daryl Impey now who's leading Simon Gerrans on his wheel. So I can't see Michael Matthews quite there, but I expect he'd be the rider they've been working for. Although at the same time, Gerrans at its best, this could suit him as well. That might be what they're thinking. You can see an Orica Bike Exchange rider coming up the middle of the peloton in that gap. That's him trying to find his teammates again.
And the Etixx Quick-Step train are still very much organised, but they are halfway down the pack. You can see the white helmets and blue jerseys just coming out of your picture now as the Road Furniture once again just creates a pinch point and interferes badly with Etixx Quick-Step and just slows down a number of the other riders further back. So that was a complication they could have done without.
And that's why they can't. That's why they were too far back. Maybe Marcel Kittel had slid back slightly on that uphill, and now that's going to put them even further back. They'll have lost all their speed and they're going to fight back up to the front again. So that's a major advantage for the other teams that are at the front. And you can see Bernard Eisel just at the back, looking over each shoulder, making sure that Edvald Boasson-Hagen and Mark Cavendish are there.
And Mountain Domestique is working as a sprinter's lead out today. Roman Kreuziger, the Czech climber, is leading out the yellow jersey of Peter Sagan. Tinkoff are at the front, and it's all strung out further back down.
And you could just see in that shot, I just caught a glimpse of the Etixx train completely broken up. Two riders. There's 2 riders there, and there's about another 20 riders, so you see another 2 of them. So that little pinch point has really put them in a complete mess.
There's the French national champion, the Dutch national champion. That is Dylan Groenewegen for Lotto Jumbo in the red, white and blue. Very easy to confuse that actually with Arthur Vichot's racing jersey, but there he is, Dylan Groenewegen. He's in about 20th wheel, and now once again Lotto Soudal reassert themselves on the front, and it's Marcel Seeberg, that towering figure, looking after his compatriot Andre Greipel in 4th wheel.
And now this is going to be downhill, this sort of downhill on the big road all the way till 600 metres to go. So Lotto Soudal have done a fantastic job, but now they've got to pace it just right so Andre Greipel isn't left there isolated too late. Mark Cavendish there just at the bottom of the screen, you can see, and I see Michael Matthews with the Bike Exchange with the green helmet, which is first in the Soudal train. He's on the wheel of Peter Sagan, the yellow jersey. Behind him is Mark Renshaw. So Mark Cavendish is going to move up a bit, but I'm sure he knows what he's doing. And then you've got, let me see who else you've got. No, I'd say at the moment it's down to Lotto Soudal, really paces. Bernie Eisel is still looking for Mark Cavendish.
Well, Marcel Seeberg pops off the front. That was a huge acceleration from the Lotto Soudal man. They've still got 2 riders though, and Andre Greipel wants to lead this from the front. He is the dominant rider at this point, and his team are showing belief in him and taking this race by the scruff of the neck. It's electrifyingly quick. They are approaching the Flamme Rouge and approaching the point where there's just 1 kilometre to go.
And like we said before, we'll start to see what Mark Cavendish's strategy is, and he seems to be sitting a bit further back. He's got his teammates in front, but he's made a decision to sit there. So it's a gamble, but there's few riders that could pull it off, and Mark Cavendish is one. There he's at the bottom of the screen. All the other sprinters are in front of him.
Kittel is making a charge with his team up the middle of the road. Marcel Kittel's still got 3 riders working for him. Here come Etixx Quick-Step now, challenging the front of the race for supremacy, and Dimension Data take things up. Where's the green jersey of Mark Cavendish? You can see him just in the middle of the road now, looking to get on the train being set up by Orica Bike Exchange, but still now it's Katusha for Alexander Kristoff as they turn and head uphill. You can see the gradient now starting to rise. Etixx Quick-Step have Marcel Kittel in the right place. The green jersey of Cavendish, well, he's some distance back, and he's opening up his sprint now, trying to get on turns, looking for a gap on the right-hand side of the road. Looks like Cavendish is boxed out of this one. Here comes Greipel alongside Kittel, and Alexander Kristoff has hit the front. Can Kristoff hold on? It's the big, powerful men. Watch out for Direct Energy and Brian Coquard coming out the right-hand side of the road. The yellow jersey of Sagan is still there, but this is one for the powerful sprinters. It's Coquard, and it's Kittel, and it's close once again between the German and the Frenchman. Once again, neither of them knew who had won when they crossed the line in Limoges. Well, that was complicated, and it was powerful, and it was full of intrigue. It wasn't the result that Mark Cavendish wanted on the day, but has Marcel Kittel prevailed in the end, or has the Frenchman got there? They bumped, and they bruised each other, and they fought tooth and nail for that finishing line, and I have no idea who got there first.
We'll get a better idea here. Look at Sagan. Look at speed. Coquard comes up from the left. He's coming up from the left-hand side of Sagan. Because there's Christophe on the right, Katusha, and Coquard is coming up so fast. It's much what he did in yesterday's sprint. And here, look, there's not even time for a lunge. That's how hard this was. They're just banging into each other in a second. It's so close.
Total physical opposites.
Kittel.
Matching each other on the line, but has Marcel Kittel just about prevailed? This is the shot. What are we going to learn from that? A blur. Nothing. I think it's Kittel, but if it is, it's a similar margin, if not even less than we saw yesterday.
Very similar to yesterday. And so we can see
2 days in a row. Well, there we go. That's the provisional stage result, and they've brought it to us much quicker than yesterday's, actually. So they had a quick look at the photo, one would imagine, and they've decided that Marcel Kittel turns his second place from stage 1 into victory on stage 4.
Yeah!
He's done it again on the Tour de France, the big German. And well, just reward actually for a brilliant tactical effort from his team.
Well, that was a great ride, because at 4 or 5 Ks to go, we thought it was all over when the whole train got caught in that pinch points and they were sent into disarray. They were absolute opposite to Lotto Soudal, who had their whole team there. Somehow Kittel got through all that and made it back up there. Now, we saw Mark Cavendish. I think Mark Cavendish had his strategy, but it was a gamble and it didn't quite work out. We saw he just got blocked in behind everybody. But look at Brian Coquard here. I mean, he's definitely going fastest out of all of them. Groenewegen coming up, the Dutch national champion. Peter Sagan, as ever, present, but he's just holding his place, contrary to Coquard and Kittel.
Well, some big-name absentees from the finishing frame today. No sign of Andre Greipel. He popped off. Mark Cavendish, too, sat up, unable to contest this to the best of his abilities. And Kittel getting it on the lunge from Brian Coquard, who gets closer and closer to victory. Blimey. Well, that's just a little bit of rubber. That's much closer than yesterday's results. So twice in 2 days, we've had an absolute thriller. And Kittel is overwhelmed. He's taken his opportunity, and he's deserved that victory.
Congrats, man. Congrats.
Marcel Kittel, twice the yellow jersey wearer. Twice he's won on stage 1 in 2013 and in 2014. And now he's had to wait till stage 4, but he has delivered once again.
Amazing, even closer than yesterday, but having had the rehearsal yesterday, the photo finish people were quicker with the result, and it goes to Marcel Kittel. We'll be hearing from him after the break. Welcome back. Here's how it looked from above. Alexander Christophe on the right being overtaken by Marcel Kittel, but Chris, Brian Coquard coming up fast on the outside.
Yeah, he comes around, but as soon as he comes off the wheel, you can see he's coming forward, leaps and bounds, and then he just stalls, and it's a slog for the line. Marcel Kittel desperately needed this. I must say I wasn't expecting it from him today after showing the last 3 stages, but he so needed it, and you can see, I think that's really what got him over the line. He desperately needed this one. Coquard gets level here and just stalls, and both
shoulder
of them,
to shoulder on the line.
Half-hearted lunge by both of them. Neither of them have got anything left to give, and probably this slow motion is how it felt for them at the time as well. Probably less than a tyre in it in the end.
Yeah, less than yesterday, certainly. Look at that. I mean, it makes yesterday's gap look quite substantial. But as I say, the photo finish guys were right on it. And there is the result. Kittel from Coquard, as we just saw. Peter Sagan hasn't finished lower than 4th so far in this Tour. And, of course, he has a stage win to his name. Dylan Groenewegen, who we saw sprinting very well in the Tour of Yorkshire, was 4th. Alexander Christophe, whose birthday it is today, was 5th. Sondre Holst-Enger 6th, Daniel Maclay up from 9th to 7th, he's sprinting well. Mark Cavendish, I think he got boxed behind Andre Greipel, following Greipel's wheel today, he was 8th, Samuel Dumoulin 9th and Simon Gerrans 10th. Now then, let's see what that's done to the overall standings. And Peter Sagan's bonus seconds on the line have bumped him up to a 12-second lead now over Julian Alaphilippe, 14 on Alejandro Valverde. And a few of today's sprinters have jumped up into the top 10 as well. Michael Matthews is 4th at 18 seconds, Simon Gerrans 5th, Lawson Craddock 6th at 35, Samuel Dumoulin 7th at 59, Brian Coquard and Sondre Holst-Enger, Mark Cavendish 10th at 143. You know what? Those are the standings we've got from the GC. I'm not sure they're going to stick, because I think all the GC favourites who are up there have been split off, and it's all going to come back together. So we've read that in good faith, but I think we should scrub that.
No, let's wait and see what's said. I mean, there was a lot of mix-up around that 3K to go mark as well, which really changed things. So fascinating end to a stage. We knew it was all going to be swamped at the end, and it really mixed it up, made it a great sprint.
Okay, well, we'll wait for an amended GC. I think it will be amended, but while we're waiting, let's hear from the stage winner, Marcel Kittel.
Marcel, you got it. You got your stage victory on the Tour de France. It had been a long time. You had been waiting for this. What's going through your mind right now?
I'm very emotional right now. I don't know. It feels like my first stage win again, and I'm super happy. I'm very proud because the team was really fighting for this win. I mean, some things went wrong the last days, and I'm so happy to be back in the Tour and to win a stage, especially like this with this uphill, and I can't believe it.
No, well, on the evidence of the past couple of days, we wouldn't have believed it. I mean, he'd been so out of sorts, hadn't really contested the sprints, and when I looked at the gradient on this final climb, I thought, as the biggest and heaviest of the sprinters, he wouldn't really be in contention.
Yeah, and he came from a long way back. His team got caught in that snarl up at 3Ks to go as they went round the right-hander. Like to see that again from a helicopter position, but it might have been one of the things that saved him and held him back a little bit. So they were coming at it as everybody else was starting to slow on that rise, put him into a great position, and then he saw his opening and timed it just right.
Looked as though Mark Cavendish was following Andre Greipel's wheel, and that might have been what prevented him contesting the sprint fully at the end. But let's find out from the man himself.
Mark, you're in good shape coming into the last 500 metres, then the peloton teams are swirl and you got a bit boxed in.
Yeah, that was it. I was just kind of wrong position. It was a bit sketchy in the final. About 5K to go. I nearly crashed on the right-hand corner. Dale Olympia put me, no, not on purpose, like, I'm going out to brake. I lost my lead out. And then they were coming for ones and twos. You don't know who to follow. Didn't want to hit it too early. And I thought I'd be on Kittle's wheel, so that'd be the best one to go. I could see his lead out men were there. In the last kilometre, I was in him. Next thing, all it was survival, trying to dodge the guys who were coming backwards. Instead of concentrating on the sprint, he was concentrating trying to get round the lead out guys, you know. I guess my own fault for not.
And you can plan. You can plan as much as you want on a finish like that, but ultimately it can turn into a lottery, can't it?
No, it can turn into a lottery, you know. Sprinting's about getting it right. It's the most tactical aspect of cycling, you know. So you have to get everything right, not just you against one other person, but you against one other person, the power 200, really, you know. That's what it is, and today I didn't get it right. So
the legs are still good. You got another opportunity in 2 days.
I'm a bit tired now. It was a long old day though.
Cheers, Mark.
Well, typical Cav, happy when he wins, grumpy when he loses. Is he being a bit hard on himself there, though, Chris?
I think he was deciding what he was going to be. He wasn't quite sure. He hasn't made his mind up yet. But, yeah, I mean, we could see him trying to dodge it. He was just trying to find a way through, but it was already over by that point, because once you'd lost your speed and you're dragging up at 4%, remember, then you're never going to get it back. And that's what happened. The lead-out train stalled. So we got the likes of the Lotto Soudal team is beautifully placed there. But they start to lose their speed, and you're never going to recover it, and that's where they come around on the outside, timing everything today.
Yeah. Chaotic sprint. No one freelances better than Mark Cavendish usually, but as he said, it was just about survival for him towards the end. We'll take a quick break, and on the other side of it, we'll have the presentations. Well, it wasn't quite as long a wait for Marcel Kittel today as it was for Mark Cavendish yesterday, and that's his reaction. Similar delight, perhaps even better dental work, and he finally takes the stage win we all expected him to get on day one. Let's get over to Ned for the presentations and see him on the podium.
Marcel Kittel on the top step of the podium, taking a stage win on stage 4. The man who is accustomed to hitting the ground running on the Tour de France, as he has done in 2013 and 2014, has had to wait. And there have been questions about whether or not he could deliver today, but he duly has. His team did it the hard way today. Didn't entirely go all their way, but with a sprinter like that, you can get it right even when you get it wrong, so to speak.
No, I think sometimes it could have been a blessing in disguise. So we saw Greipel had his full team up there. They looked in the best position, but that ended up being the worst position as he got swamped. And Kittel and Essex Quickstep were coming from behind, and that worked perfectly. And I think Mark Cavendish had hoped, as he said, to be on Kittel's wheel and coming from behind, but was just that little bit too far and ended up, as he said, dodging people rather than forcing through them.
An extravagantly small margin separating first from second. Absolutely ridiculous after the longest stage. 232.5 kilometres separated by the width of a bit of rubber in the end. But first, Marcel Kittel. Second, and improving all the time, Brian Cocard. And surely the young French sprinter will score on the Tour de France. If not on this edition of the race, then soon enough. It was another fantastic sprint, and the outcome as close as you like. And it's good to see Marcel Kittel scoring, a hugely popular figure. Not a day for Mark Cavendish, though, and by his own admission, just not quite getting it right and reading the right wheels in that chaotic finale.
No, it was, and I think that pinch point inside the last 5Ks, that although it compromised Essex Quickstep, it ended up being putting them in an idle position. Mark Cavendish got caught out slightly and lost his lead-out train. And we can see here, you see Mark Cavendish behind. Look at Marcel Kittel had his lead out already. That was back up there. So he gets set up. Greipel once again finds himself at the front too early. Yep. Christophe on the left doing a strong sprint. That's the first time we've seen of Christophe. Sagan being Sagan. He's there. But Brian Cocard on the right comes up faster than anybody. He timed it to, well, you'd say perfection. If he'd won it, it'd been perfection. But it was so close to perfection. Marcel Kittel got it, and that's the win he wanted.
And once again, this man wasn't far off the podium. Peter Sagan, a thumbs up. He's going to enjoy a third day in yellow, and he's joined on the stage by Raymond Poulidor, a man who famously never wore the yellow jersey that Peter Sagan is making his own in the early phase of this edition of the Tour de France. Poulidor, local to this region of France, hugely popular, hugely venerated, and Sagan is making a legend all of his own. In years to come, Sagan will be remembered with every bit the affection that Raymond Poulidor is, and a nice moment for young and old to enjoy on the Tour.
Yep, and let's just confirm the GC for you. In fact, amend it because it wasn't right before, as we suspected. Peter Sagan has increased his lead with his third place bonus today. He now leads Julian Alaphilippe, who's leading in the white jersey competition, incidentally, by 12 seconds. Alejandro Valverde remains third at 14 seconds. Warren Barguil has leapt back ahead of Chris Froome. They're fourth and fifth now, but that was just about placings at the end, no time differences. That group of riders behind are now all at 8 seconds. It's Kreuziger, Quintana, Aru, Michael Matthews and Pierre Rolland now in the top 10. Right, let's take a look at tomorrow's route map, and stage 5 is the first mountain stage of the 2016 Tour. 6 categorised climbs spread over 216 kilometres of the Massif Central between Limoges and Le Lion. The Pas de Pérols is the highest of them. In fact, it's the highest paved road in the Massif Central at 1,589 metres. After that come the Col de Pertus and the Col de Fond de Serre. That's the last official climb, but once the riders are over that, the road rises again in the final kilometre. Should be a great stage, and we'll see the favourites out front again. 2 p.m. for live coverage of stage 5 tomorrow, 7 o'clock for highlights, and 7 o'clock, of course, for highlights of today's stage tonight. Or today's stage this evening, whatever makes the sense, if anything does make sense. Chris, before we move on to tomorrow's stage, quick word about Peter Sagan, not only leading the race, his figures so far this Tour read 3rd, 1st, 4th, 3rd.
It's remarkable consistency, considering everyone's talking about a chaotic environment, but somebody's found a formula to read it because he's consistently there. And I think if you needed to be in the front and you weren't sure how to deal with it, that's the one wheel to look for, really, isn't it? It will at least get you there or thereabouts. So incredible consistently, and it seems to be able to vary across terrain as well.
And the main factor contributing to the chaos today, I mean, there's always chaos on stages of the Tour, was that pinch point on the run-in. And I suppose there's not much that the organisers can really do about that these days, because whichever run-in you choose, you're going to come across road furniture like this.
Yeah, and of course they've all got a road book. Lots of the teams do research now. They know it's coming. They had a bit of a regrouping, which I think compounded it, but everybody is just ready for the final. And they effectively, although there's plenty of space there on either side, there was only one race route, and it's only about 5 riders wide, so they get caught out. And really, you just have to go around that corner in the first turn. You had to treat it as if it was the finish. But the ones that were really looking for the finish will have known about that and done everything they could to get around it first. Luckily, no one came down, but it's quite something. Normally, for a final, they'd have removed some of that road furniture.
Yeah. Talking about the road book, we were all looking forward to that punchy little climb with 11 kilometres to go, and it seemed to turn up at about 7.5.
No, it turned up, and it was only a bit of a drag as it went, so we were expecting that to be a decisive factor, perhaps a breakaway that needed to be controlled immediately by the sprinters team. Never happened, and really it was that last finishing drag at 4% that made all the difference today.
All right, now, before we fall off the air, let's hear quickly from the yellow jersey, Peter Sagan.
Peter, of course, more points for you in the green jersey, the yellow jersey still on shoulders. But third today, can you explain us what happened in the final kilometer of this sprint that looked a stage for you?
Look, you know, sprint is like also lottery, you know, and I have to wait a little bit more in the final because I start the same time like Kittel. Also for him was very long finish because Gokar just come from back because he waited, he was more patient, and then he almost won. But yeah, I am happy for the points, for yellow jersey, and for me Tour de France, it's for me it's very nice. It's going very well.
We squeezed him in. It's always worth the effort. We're about to fall off the air, so we've got to get off and prepare the highlight show. See you back here at 7 o'clock.